Hi, welcome to our retro remakes for Clickteam Fusion 2.5. This fantastic version of Galaxian has been made by TJ. I'm Adam, we're from Impact Gamers, and we're going to show you how to make your own version. So we've titled ours Galaxy Invaders, and you have to defeat the swarms of enemies as they dive bomb and attack you as you shoot at them and work your way to saving the galaxy. Now this is based off Galaxian from 1979, an amazing arcade game which spawned several different sequels. You are limited in this game to only being able to move left and right and to fire. Your fire rate we've set to be only one laser per screen. So if you hit something, you get to shoot again. If you miss, you have to wait for your laser to disappear off. And I am just about to complete it. See them breaking formation and coming at you, and then entered a high score. Woohoo! Let's show you how to make it. So we've loaded up Clickteam Fusion 2.5, and we're going to start a new application. So we're going to click on File and New. And straight away, right from the beginning, we're going to save our work. So click on File, Save, and I'm going to call ours Galaxy Invaders. So we're going to click on our application itself, which is this red circle with yellow lightning and the name that we've just saved it with. And we're going to go into its properties window down here. And we're going to go and change the window size and change it from 640 by 480. We're going to change this second 480. Just click on the numbers to select them, and we're going to change it to 640 by 640, making it square. Yes, we'd like the frame to match the same size as the application, so all our levels will be the same size as that. Now we're going to go from the storyboard editor where we are here, and we're going to go into the frame editor to start adding things to our level, and we'll just click on the grey number 1 to get there. Now in the frame 1, in our first level, we're going to change the background color in its properties. So click on frame 1, go down to background color in settings. You can click settings if it's not selected. It's a red tick there. And we're going to choose a dark background color. And I'm going to choose black because it's a space-based game so that it looks more like space. So the first thing we're going to do is add in our player spaceship. So we're going to click on Insert, New Object, Active, OK, and left click to drop it down. We'll put it right near the bottom of the screen in the center. In the properties window, make sure you've got About selected, and you can choose the name. Let's call it P1, and then we will choose its movement. So we're going to click on Movement and change it from being a static movement to 8 directions, not physics 8 directions, but 8 directions. We want to limit the directions. The spaceship should only move left and right. So where it says directions, we're going to click on all those numbers and clear them, reset them, and then we're going to choose right, which is number 0, and left, which is number 16. And just click off that and it will save those directions. So we're limited to those directions. Now we're going to change the artwork of our player ship. So we're going to right click and click Edit, and you can clear it, you can change the zoom, and you could use the filled in boxes. You could draw your own spaceship. You could use the brush tool and other tools and fill in sort of a spaceship look, and you can do whatever you like, but we pre-made some. So I'll just show you how to use those if you want to use those. We're going to click Import, and we're going to choose player_1. Make sure Import as animation is checked, and the hotspot and action point are set to the center, and we're just going to replace what I just drew there. And there we have it. Now, it's an animation with a flashing sort of thrust on the spaceship, so we're going to change the direction options. Just click on that. Set the speed to something lower, maybe 15. Just click off it to save that, and then press Loop. Now you can check that out by pressing play and check that you're happy with that. If you're not, you can increase the speed and make it play faster or slower. Press OK to save those changes, and then we'll add some more objects in. The next thing we're going to add in is the bullets. We're going to add in the player bullets and the enemy bullets at the same time. So we're going to click Insert at the top, New Object, Active, OK, and we're going to put them this time down the side of the frame so the player doesn't see them. So let's rename them. Let's click on this about property, and we'll call this one good bullet. And as before, we'll right click and edit. I'm just going to import, or you could draw your own. I'm going to import the good bullet facing upwards as animation. Okay. And then direction options, I'm just going to set it to loop and set the speed to maybe 30 there, maybe even faster. I'll leave it at 50 to get it to flash. Do the same for the enemy bullet. Insert new object and active. Okay. Click to put it down. Rename it in the about properties. So enemy bullet. Right click and edit. And we're going to import. Now this time, if you draw your bullet, draw it facing to the right. So when we press OK with those same settings, animation and center, it's facing to the right because this time they're directional. Our bullets are only going to fire upwards. We don't need the other directions. So we're going to click on direction options, loop it, and this time we're going to pull this slider to show 32 different directions. Then we're going to right click on the direction that we've got our animation for. These ones are blank. So we're going to right click on this black square and click create rotated directions. So Clickteam there is copied, but with a rotation to all those directions and kept all the same settings. And press OK. And we've got our two bullets in place. So we're now going to add in some events, some conditions and actions of how we can control the game. And we'll do that in the event editor. So just click on the event editor. And to tidy things up, we're going to insert a group so that we can just refer to things easily. So insert group of events, and we will title this player control. This isn't vital. It's just will help us explain and show where things are. So now in player control, we'll click on new condition, and with the player one, the P1 spaceship, we want to check its position. We want to test its position to make sure it can't leave the screen. So we're going to click on the left arrow and the right arrow in that white box, just those two there, and press OK. And we're going to tell the spaceship, we're going to right click underneath the spaceship under P1 on that row, going to add an action. So we're going to say movement, and we can choose stop, which I will do, or wrap around play area, which will mean it can bounce, not bounce, it can teleport to the other side. You could choose bounce, but that's a bit odd for space. So we'll choose stop, but you could choose wrap if you wanted. The next thing we want to do is add about firing. So we're going to click new condition, the mouse and keyboard, and we're going to choose the keyboard. Repeat while key is pressed because we want to be able to hold the fire button down. And we'll use spacebar. And the P1 is going to launch an object. So we're going to right click on that row, on row 3 there, and we're going to click launch an object, and we want it to fire the good bullet. Press OK. And we want to not use the direction of the player because I'll shoot left or right. We want to launch in selected direction, and 8 is fine. Upwards is what we want. And I'm going to lower the speed to 80 to suit the game. You can make it a bit faster if you want. Okay, we're going to test our game. We'll do this a lot, so just remember this process. Press run and press application, and you can move. Let's have a look. You can move, let's see, move all the way to the left, and you stop, move all the way to the right, you stop, and hold down spacebar, and you will fire. And you can see a bit of a bug. We are crazily overpowered here with our lasers. This is sort of like a huge power up, be able to wipe out all the enemies in a second or so. So we're going to change that. In order to do that, we need to close our test application. So you can see it's got the same logo as our application, and we need to just close this window. We're going to place a limit on the condition that it's not only when we press spacebar, but also only if there are no other bullets. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to insert. So right click on the words and choose insert, and it's to do with the bullet. We're going to pick or count, and we're going to compare to the number of good bullet options, and we're going to say that it has to be equal to zero, that there are no bullets there, so number equals 0. Now if we run our application, you'll see we've got a brand new bug. I'm pressing spacebar and nothing is happening. And that's because our good bullet on the side is still there. So we're going to click on the good bullet on the workspace toolbar and go to its runtime options and just turn off create at start. We don't want it there from the beginning. It'll still be on our frame. We have a quick look. It's still there and it's still in our asset bar, but it won't actually be made when the game starts. So now if we run our application, it's much better rate of fire. Save your work again, and we'll get on with doing the enemies in formation. So to add in the enemy positions, we're going to go back to the frame editor, click on the frame editor icon on the top, and we're going to turn on our grid. So we're going to click on grid setup, which has got these red arrows here, and we're going to change it. So it should be 32 by 32 is the size of our sprite so far, and we're going to snap to, and you don't have to show the grid, but I'll leave it turned on just for this demonstration. So these red dots signify the grid. And it also means that when you move things, they will only move between the dots so that you can align things clearly. So we're going to insert a new object, active object, OK, click to put it down. And we're going to rename it. And we're going to call this enemy position. We're going to edit it, right click, edit. And we're going to clear. And this time I'm just going to choose a color. I'll choose blue and fill it in with the fill toolbar. So choose a from the palette, choose a color from the palette, click on the fill toolbar, and then click where you want to fill. Okay. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some alterable values to the object. Now, this will tie in so that the enemies have their own position and they move back to their position once they fly off, like in the game. So we're going to change, we can click new and change alterable value A. We can double click there, change it to ID. And that's all we need to do there. The enemy positions need to be set for each enemy. So I'm just going to drag them in, and I'm just going to drag in a formation. So you can click and pull from the sidebar. The other option you have is you could hold down Control on the keyboard and pull, and it will copy whatever you're pulling. And then the other way that you could do it is you could right click and duplicate and choose sort of rows and columns. If you do that, it'll fill them in as a block, which won't work so well for the formation. So I'm just going to position my ones like that to make a formation there. The final part of these positions is we're going to set them to have some movement. So click on the movement property on any of them. They're all the same, and change the type to, at the very bottom, just off screen there, Invaders. So we want them moving at start. Moving to the left is fine. But what we want to do is we want the step size to be 10 for X, but for Y, we want them to drop down a row at a time. So our row is 32 and speed 50 is fine. So now we can save our game. We can press the disk or file and save. And if we run our application, we can just check that they move okay. And there they are moving across the screen. We can't interact with them yet. The enemies aren't actually there, but when they get to the end, hopefully they'll all drop down a row. Perfect. And carry on the other side. Great. Okay, we're going to add a few things in here. We're going to add enemies in, and we're going to also add in scores. So let's follow along. If you insert a new object, an active object, and press OK, and we'll pop it down outside to start off with, and we're going to name this. We're going to call this enemy 1, just in case we have variations later. Going to right click and edit it. You can draw your own enemy, and if you can draw it facing to the right, but we're just going to add in our enemy 1. So it's enemy 1_1, that purple one there. The same thing, import as animation and replace. And in the direction options, we're going to get it to loop, and I'm just going to get the speed to be a little slower. Try 20. Get it flashing. There we go. Now we want to drag the slider to 32 directions as we did with the bullets. Right click on the black square, create rotated directions, and it's copied all that information across. Press OK. And then the next thing we want to do is add some alterable values to it. So if we click on the AZ, new, the first thing we're going to do is the same as the position holders. So the enemy positions, we're going to double click on alterable value A and call it ID. We can leave that at 0. The next thing we're going to do is set a new one and double click on alterable value B. This will be the points you get for killing that enemy. I'm going to set this to start off as a default of 10. And then we're going to set another alterable value here, and we're going to call this shoot. In the flags, we're also going to set up nice and early for when the enemies are going to drop off and then return. So we're going to add a flag, which is just like a switch, an on or an off. It's checked or unchecked. And we're going to change flag 0. We're going to call that drop. And add a new one. Flag 1 is going to be return. Now, they should be unchecked. And that's how it should look. So that all the enemies behave in the same way, we need to add them to a qualifier. So we're going to go into the event properties and we're going to click qualifier. And this allows us to add them to a group. We click on the blank space next to qualifier, click edit. Then we click add. And there's some choices. It doesn't matter what they're called, but it helps if it makes sense. There's no point calling them friends if they're going to be enemies. So let's call them enemies. You could call them bad. You could call them whatever. But for the tutorial, we'll call them enemies. It doesn't do anything other than place them in a group together. So it doesn't add any code, any rules. It just places them in a qualifying group. Okay, so they're all in the enemy groups. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert a counter. So we're going to insert a new object, and this counter is going to be used to set the IDs for the enemies to match. So we're going to drop that off screen, and we'll give that a name in the about properties, and we'll call that the ID count. So that we can see the score appear, we're going to insert a new object, a score, which will show our score. Not high score, but this one's score. Click OK. Going to click to drop it off screen. Now, there's different ways that you can change its color. You could change it to be a text, but we're going to leave it as is, as an image, and I'll show you how to edit it. So if you right click and edit, if you struggle to click there, you can right click here and edit. And we're going to click on A for the text tool. We're then going to choose a color that will stand out. So we're going to choose red for our game, and then we're going to click import font. And then you can choose a font that you feel suits your game. I think System is quite a old-fashioned font that we could use. And press OK. And press OK. And we're going to pop that in the top right corner because the score grows to the left. Before we go into the event editor now, what we'll do is we will position all the enemies onto a position so that they all match up. So you just drag and drop them. Later on, we could add a different enemy into different positions, but for the moment, we've only got one. So I'm just going to hold down Control and drag my enemy in there. And while I'm here, I'm just going to set their default direction to be downwards. So in their movement properties, when it says initial direction, I'm going to click on that and choose down. So they'll start off facing downwards. So now we're going to go into the event editor and we're going to add in some rules to handle the movement. So in the event editor, we're going to click on number 5 to select it, and then we're going to insert a group of events to tidy it up, and we'll call this enemy movement. Then what we're going to do is we're going to click on new condition underneath enemy movement and choose storyboard controls and choose starter frame. So at the very beginning, we want to go through every single position and match it up with an enemy. So we're going to right click under enemy position and choose count for each object. And we're going to set its identifier, set the ID, that alterable value we set up. Now, what we need to do is we need to have a condition for that loop. So new condition, click on enemy position, click on loops, on each object and type the same one in to link them together. So at the start of the frame, it's going to run through every single enemy position. But we also want to gather which enemy is on top. So we're going to right click and we're going to choose insert, and we're going to see if the enemy position is overlapping any of the groups of enemies. So click on that. Then we'll use our ID count. It's starting off at 0, so we're going to immediately add 1 to it. So the first action is we're going to right click on that row underneath the counter and add to counter, add 1. Okay. The next thing we want to do is we want any of the enemies that are on top of the enemy position to have that ID. So we're going to right click on the enemy and we're going to go Alt for values. We're going to set the ID. We're going to click on the counter and get its current value. Now, if the 0 is left in that was there earlier that got overwritten, it would say syntax error. So just make sure it just says value of the ID count. And we're going to do the exact same thing for the position. So Alt for values, we're going to set its ID, Alt for values, set ID, and ID count current value. So now they all match. They've all sort of linked together with their original position. Now we need to get them to move along. So we're going to click new condition and we're going to click on the cogs and we're going to say always. And we're always going to run a loop called move. So for the enemies, we're going to right click under the enemy group, count for each object, and we'll call it move. Then we're going to have a new condition that on group enemies on the loop called move. So type it in again. We're going to affect the position of the enemy, but we need to know which position it links with. So we're going to right click on the words and insert and say, do that enemy position, Alt for values. We're going to compare the IDs is equal to the group enemy value ID. So you end up with that right now. But later on in the game, we also want to make sure that the enemies are not dropping or returning. So we're going to right click on the words of the ID of and click insert. And then we're going to click group enemies, Alt for values. And this time a flag is off. Flag is off, drop. And then do exactly the same, right click on the words for the other flag. So group enemies, Alt for value, flags is off, return. Okay, so that's fantastic. It would still work without these, but later on we'll have to add these in, so we'll do it now. So all we need to do now is under the group enemies, we need to set their position, select position, and we're going to choose it relative to the enemy position. And it'll be the enemy position that matches its ID. So now we can run our application and they will follow along nicely like that. Save your work. And we'll get on with the next section. So still in the event editor, we're going to click on the last number 11 there, and we're going to insert a group of events. And this is going to be the combat. This is how we can fight all of the code that will show that how we can destroy the enemies. So the first thing we're going to do is a new condition, a nice simple one now. The good bullet collision with another object, any of the enemies. Fantastic. And there's a few things that are going to happen in here. So first of all, we'll add to our score. We'll use that. So score is held under the player 1 joystick. So that's sort of you. That's your score, your lives, and your controls. So if we right click there, score, add to score, and we've got it contained in the group of enemies. So in the group of enemies, in the value, we're going to get the points. So add the points to the score. We then need to destroy the enemy. And we'll also destroy the good bullet. So right click and destroy there. Okay, we're going to save that. We're going to run our application and just check that we can shoot the enemies. Fantastic. Now, we can with the enemies, if you want, if you double click on them, we can go to their disappearing. I can right click on it. So we can with the enemies, we can right click on them, we can edit, and we can click on the disappearing, which is when they get blown up, and we can import. So we can import enemy destroyed, and with the same thing with center of mass. But in the direction options, we'll change the speed to something like 20 when they blow up. And you can test that again and just see the animation play. Great. Let's close our test application and save it again. So we're now going to get the enemy to shoot back at you. So we're going to, in the combat, we're going to click on new condition, and we're going to use the timer and a random count. So in the timer, we're going to choose every, and we're going to set that to 1/100th of a second. So it's happening 100 times a second. For all the enemies, we're going to right click under the enemies, and we're going to go to alt values, and we're going to set, not add, we're going to set, and we're going to change it to their shooting. I'm going to select 0 so that when I press random, it overwrites it. Random 800. So you end up with random with an open parenthesis 800 and close parenthesis or bracket, curved bracket. So press OK. Now we're going to check if they choose the random number 1. So new condition. For any of the group enemies, we're going to see their ultra values. We're going to compare. We're going to have a look at the shoot and see if it's become 1 at any point. We're using 1, not 0, because they start off at 0 and we don't want them to all shoot at the beginning. Now we're going to limit this. We don't want them shooting in this way when they're dropping. So we're going to right click, insert, and do the same thing of group enemies. Alt value flags is off, and just make sure they're not dropping down. We've got a special rule for when they're dropping down. So if they're not dropping down, then we want them to launch an object. So right click, launch an object, enemy bullet. We'll drop it down at speed 50, but you can choose a different speed, and launch in selected directions. We don't want 8, we just want 24 down. If you had both selected, it would 50-50, just pick one of them. So we want just them shoot downwards. Okay. And then we're going to say new condition. If the enemy bullet this time collision with another object, our player, we're going to subtract lives. We will have 3 lives in this game. So we'll right click under player 1 object, number of lives, subtract from number of lives 1. And that's under the joystick object, not the actual ship we're controlling, but the joystick, which is score and lives and control. So subtract 1 from number of lives. So you can test that. You can run your application. And you can see that we've got a bit of a bug there. So immediately I can see that there doesn't look like much of an impact because they're just traveling through us. So we close our test application. We just need to add a right click and destroy under the enemy bullets, but also got hit by more than 3 bullets and nothing happened. So what we're going to do is we're going to add that rule in, and then we'll display our lives as well. So we'll do new condition, click on the joystick of player 1, but not joystick controls, but just the icon. What we want is when number of lives reach 0. And that's a special rule that will run immediately. And at that point, we will right click and destroy our spaceship. And at this point, if you want to add in a destroy animation and a disappearing, you can. So you can just right click and edit, or double click on your workspace toolbar on your P1, and I'll just choose player destroyed, add that in, and set the speed to 20 as well. So if we were to test that, we would die, but we can't see our lives. So we're going to go back to the frame editor, and we're going to insert a new object, and it's going to be lives. It's that heart, pop it in bottom left. Now we're going to edit this, right click, edit, right click and edit, right click and edit, and we're going to click import, and we will just choose the lives object. There's no animation for it, so we don't need that checked. And there we have 3 lives shown there. Now if we test it, let's get hit by some bullets. Got hit by 1, 2, 3, and we're dead. Works fine. Fantastic. save your work. Now we're going to sort out these enemies being able to drop down and attack us. So they're going to move differently. So if you just select any of them and go to their movement properties, you'll see that they've got movement type number 0. And for movement 0, we're going to add extra movements in. So click in the white space and click on the plus minus button. And then you've got a yellow star sort of around a black border. So we want a new movement, and it will be called movement 1. Press OK. Now, making sure you've got movement 1 selected, change the type to bouncing ball. We're going to set their initial direction, like we did for direction for the player. We're going to set it, but we're going to set these to numbers 7 and 9. So you can just reset them and set them to 7 and 9. And their speed we'll set to 30. And you could change that for different enemies. You could have different speeds that they descend and attack you. Now, there's different ways we could do this. We're going to show you how to use a mask, sort of an object that's invisible to show where an enemy is or a player is, to sort of cause an action to happen. You could do it with coordinates, sort of your X and Y positions, but we're going to show you how to use a mask. We're going to insert a new object for our drop zone. It's going to be active and put it down. Now the drop zone is just an area so that we know when the enemies are far enough away from you that they can shoot at you and it's going to be fair. So we're going to rename it in the about properties, call it drop zone. We're then going to edit its look, so you can right click and edit. We're going to clear it with a piece of paper, and I'm going to use like a bright pink and click the fill bucket fill tool, which I've already got, and click to fill in. I'm going to click once on it and I will get the resizing. Now, if you click twice quickly, you get the editor, but if you wait between clicks, you cycle between selected, resize, and rotate. So if I go to the resize, I'm going to pull it out, and I don't want the enemy shooting at me if they're any closer than down here. And also, I'm going to only count the drop zone in this area. I could probably pull it up to the top of the screen, but I'll leave it like that. Now, if you're really happy with where it is, you can do several different things. If it's on top of things, you could always order it to back so that you can see the other objects. You could also choose in its display options to set a blend coefficient. Now, this means that if we set it to 255, it's invisible. If we set it to 128, it's semi-transparent. Any number between 0 and 255. 0 is opaque, 255 is see-through. Now, we could do that as well if you had it overlapping. And also the other thing is you can choose to lock it. So you can lock it so that it can't be moved. And that's a really useful thing to do if you've got an object that needs to stay in the same place. So we can right click and choose lock. To unlock, you have to hold Control and Shift and click. So that's quite tricky. Or in a range, you can choose to unlock everything that is locked in your game. So now that's locked, we can't select it, we can't move it, but that's fine. We're happy with that. Now, we don't want to see this drop zone or these enemy positions in the game, so we're just going to make them invisible. So click enemy position and change visible at start and check that. And for drop zone, we'll do the same. And if you can't select it because you've locked it, you can just use the version up in the asset bar here. Now, visible at start means we can still see it when building the game, so that's really useful compared with blend coefficient. If we made it invisible with the blend coefficient, we just wouldn't see it at any point, and then that's really confusing. So it's better to set it to be semi-transparent and not visible at start. So if we run our application, the enemies will now not have those blue boxes around. Close your test application if you're testing it and save your game. Now we're going to do the drop movement and different aspects of that over several sections. First of all, just having them break formation. So we're going to go into the event editor, and in the enemy movement section, we're going to click new condition, and it's going to be to do with the timer, and it's going to be every, but we're going to be a random amount of time. So we're going to click user calculation. Now this is in thousandths of seconds, not hundreds as before. So a random range between 2,000 and 5,000. So that's actually between 2 and 5 seconds. And you could change that to fit how you wanted. If you want them to break off more often, you could have a lower number here. If you want it to be more random, you could have the difference between the numbers being bigger. But a random range, 2000, between 2000 and 5000. What we're going to do then is we're going to then check for an enemy that is not already diving. So we're going to do that. Right click, insert, and again, group enemies, ultra values, flags is off. We don't want them already dropping. And then right click, out of those that aren't dropping, right click and insert. We're going to pick a random one. So pick or count. And then we're just going to say pick group enemies at random. So quite a few things there. Random amount of time, any that aren't dropping, random enemy is going to choose to drop. And what we're going to do then is we're going to set 3 different actions under the group enemies. So under group enemies, we're going to first of all right click and change their movement. So let's just move this so you can see it. We're going to movement, we're going to move it even more. We're going to right click under group enemies on that line, and we're going to choose movement, multiple movements, select movement. And remember, it's movement 1 that we changed to be bouncing ball. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set drop flag to be on. So right click, flags, set on, drop. Okay. Then the last thing we're going to do is just make sure they do fly upwards to start with. So we're going to right click and click direction, select direction, and we're going to clear it, reset, erase all the directions there, that reset icon, and we're going to choose those 7 and 9 just to make sure it forces them upwards like we wanted. Test your game. So run your application. And if we keep a watch of them, there's one of them broken formation, another one. The issue is that they're not dropping back down, that they're just flying off. And so we're going to have a look at getting them to actually target the drop down and target the player. So if you close your test application, you can save your work. So still in this event editor, we're going to add a new condition under the enemy movement. So we're just going to click on new condition here. And it's to do with the timer, just to space things out, and every. And this time we're going to have it as 0 seconds, but 10 hundredths of a second. So 10 times a second. We'll press OK. And this time we want to know if the enemy is dropping. So we'll right click, insert, group enemies, ultra value flags is on this time. Make sure on. So if the enemy is dropping, then we want to check which way they're going. And if we right click and insert on drop is on, and if we click on group enemies, direction, compare direction, we're going to select all of the arrows apart from upwards and downwards. So between 7 and 0 and between 31 and 25, we're going to click all of those arrows. So if it's facing any of those directions, we want it to turn around a bit more. So we want it to turn around with a direction of whatever it currently is, -1, so that it's working its way around clockwise. So we're going to right click and we're going to click direction. And we're going to choose select direction. And we're going to use a calculation, this button here, 1 + 1. And we're going to find out what their current direction is. So click on group enemies, animation this time, current direction. So whatever the direction is, if we set it to this, it would just stay on the same direction. But we just want a -1. Type in -1 or use the keypad here. And that's great. And they will rotate round. We're going to do that all again for if they're facing to the left, so that they rotate round counterclockwise. So new condition is the timer, every, no seconds, but 10 hundredths of a second. And we want to check that they're dropping. So insert, right click and insert. A ultra value flag is on, that they are dropping. But this time, right click and insert that the group enemies direction, compare directions is, let's take that one off. Any from 8 all the way round to 23 there. So any of those. So we're going to right click, direction, select direction, the 1+1 for calculation. Going to click on the group enemies and choose animation current direction to get whatever they are. This time I'm going to add one, so it rotates around counterclockwise. So there we go. So that's all, just saying 10 times a second, if an enemy's dropping, just get it to turn around one bit of the angle at a time. These aren't degrees, these are just 32 different directions. Okay, let's test that out. So if we run the application, this time when the enemy drops, hopefully, there we go, it arcs round and drops down properly. Much better. Still not there though. With your test application closed, we're going to make the enemies aim at the player. So what we're going to do is we're going to say new condition under the enemy movement group. So just under here, under the other ones we've just added. We're going to say the group enemies, ultra values, flags is on, drop. So if they are dropping, and this time we're going to right click and insert the group enemies direction. We're going to compare, and this time just downwards. So if they've managed to face downwards, then what we're going to get them to do is target the player. So they've done a full loop and they're ready to target the player. So we're going to right click under group enemies, direction, look in direction of this time, not select direction, but look in direction of. It's going to be relative to the P1. Okay, right. Now we can test their game. So let's see if they fly a bit more towards me this time. There we go. You can see it arcing towards me, and as soon as it targets me, it starts rotating back down so that it gives a kind of wiggly pattern of movement, a curved approach to me. Great. It's working, but there's a few things that still not. We need them to return back to formation. We also need them to kill us when they touch us. So still in the enemy movement event editor, we're going to click on new condition. We're going to check to see if the enemy goes below the bottom of the screen. And this time we're going to use its position. So we're going to click on group enemies position. And we're going to compare the Y position to a value. And we're going to see if it gets greater or equal. If it gets bigger than, and we'll delete 0. We will click on storyboard controls and we'll get the frame height. Now we know it's 640, but if you made your game a different size, frame height will just get whatever the height of your game is. And we want to add 20 because we want it to have a little bit of space to go off the bottom. So not when it just touches the bottom, but when it goes all the way past. So frame height plus 20. And if it's done that, we need to do a few things. So we're going to do 3 actions. We're going to right click and first of all, we'll set the flag for the group enemies to be off for dropping. It's no longer dropping. It's now returning, so we're going to turn that on. So right click, flags, set on, return. And then we're going to right click on the group enemies, select, set a Y coordinate, and we're going to set the Y coordinate to be -20. Now, if you press the minus sign here and then write 20, it adds space in, so it says it's an error. -20 should just be the minus sign and 20, so just delete the space if you do that, or just type it in on the keyboard. And so that will move it back to the top. Now that it is back at the top, we're going to just change the way that its movement behaves. So new condition, if group enemies, ultra values, if their flag is on, if they're returning, and then right click and insert. If there is an enemy position and its ultra value compared to ultra value ID is equal to the group's value of ID, and do it that way round, that the enemy position and the group enemies, so it matches up. If it matches up, then that means that you need to look at that position because you're going to return there. So that group enemies, right click, direction, look in direction of, not select direction this time, and relative to whichever enemy position matches. Now, when they hit it, they need to go back into formation. So new condition, if group enemies collision with another object at enemy position, and if we insert that the group enemies flags is on of returning, it's hit when it's returning, and the enemy position compared to one of the octopus values, the ID is equal to the ID of the enemy, then it means that they were the ones that started off there. So then at that point, we need to do 4 different things. We're going to right click and we're going to flags. We're going to set off returning. It's no longer returning. We're then going to right click and movement, multiple movements. So, let's see if we can get that on screen. So on the same tick on that line, right click, movement, multiple movements, select movement, and back to movement 0. We then want to change its position, select position. It is going to match up anyway as soon as the move command happens, the move loop, but we might as well set it relative to the enemy position so it does it immediately. And then right click, direction, select direction, down. So we set return to be off, we select movement type to be movement 0, set the position to match up exactly, and set direction to downwards. Let's give that a try. Let's run our application. So now when they fly off, if we can see, go back to the top and go back to where they were put. Fantastic, working well. Now there's still several issues that they don't hurt us, and some other options, so let's resolve those. So we'll start off with the fact that they don't kill us when they hit us. So new condition, we'll say that if an enemy, group enemies, because it could be any of them, if they collide with another object, us, then at that point, what we can do is we can set our lives to 0. So right click underneath the joystick object of player 1, number of lives, set number of lives 0. And because that gets set to 0, that means that it will automatically trigger the action that we will get destroyed. But we'll leave them survive. You could say that the enemy gets destroyed as well, but you don't have to. So let's make it that the enemies kill us if they touch us. So new condition, if a group enemy collision with another object, player 1, this is in the combat section here to tidy it up, then what we're going to do is all we need to do for player lives, we're going to right click, number of lives, set number of lives to 0. Okay. And then that will trigger this line that we've got here and it will destroy us. We could destroy the enemy as well, but we'll might as well leave it. So we're going to, in the combat group, we're going to click new condition and we're going to go to the group enemies and we're going to check their flag once again. Is flag on, dropping. Then right click and insert. We're going to see if, and we're going to use our drop zone now, if the group enemies collisions are overlapping the drop zone. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use their shoot. So on their shooting, it's set to pick a number between 0 and 799. That's what random 800 means. Now we only get them to shoot when it's 1. So what we'll do is make it much more likely to shoot if they're overlapping here. So we'll right click and insert. And we're going to choose that if group enemies, if their ultimate values compared to one of their ultimate values, if their shoot is lower or equal to 15, then they'll shoot at us. And we'll change the way they shoot at us. Underneath the group enemies on that condition, we're going to right click and launch an object, enemy bullet, but this time the enemy bullet is going to be fired, let's set speed 50 again, in direction of, and once again relative to the player. Now this gives it, when they're in that sort of window of that pink mask, that collision mask that we've created, they're the drop zone, then far more likely to shoot. So if you find that they're shooting too low, then just move. If you need to unlock it, but then move your drop zone to be in a different position. So let's have a look and see if that works. See if one of them drops and shoots at an angle at us. Oh, yep. Whoa, there we go. Yep. Much more vicious, and we've been destroyed by it. So both those codes are working. So you could change the speed. Oh, it's set to 100. That did seem quick. You can change the speed, drop it back down to 50 to make it a bit easier. And also, the lower this number is, the less likely they are to shoot. Save your work. So if you haven't already, you could add in some animations for player one and for the enemy of them being destroyed. So you can just right click and edit, as we showed you before, and choose disappearing and import the destroyed animations, or draw your own. And I would suggest a slow speed and direction options of 20. Also, we can add sounds. So there's the times where the enemy shoots. We could play a sound. So you can right click underneath the sound and say samples, play a sample, and browse. And you can choose enemy attacks for that one. And I can also drag down and copy it to when they shoot coming at us. Also, when they choose to dive bomb, I could have a sound here. So this, when it picks from one of them samples, play a sample and browse. Enemy dive. So dive there. We've got a start a frame command here. We could put another one in if we wanted. And if you right click samples, play and loop sample, then you could choose to have background music and choose 0 for a continuous loop. And then for us shooting, just up here, one of our original lines, samples, right click samples, play samples, and player fires. And then you can choose for when we get hit. So when a bullet hits us, we can sample, play sample, enemy hit. And then when we're destroyed, when lives are 0, do that. So you can add samples in for whatever you want. Play destroyed. So we can just choose enemy destroyed. And so enemy destroyed, there, samples, play sample. So when a good bullet hits an enemy, then enemy destroyed. So that adds lots more atmosphere into it. So you can save your game there. Also, what adds a bit of atmosphere is just the background. It's very plain because it's space. So we're going to add in some backgrounds of moving stars. So in our frame editor, we go in here, we're going to insert a new object and active, and we're going to name it, call it star. And you can right click and edit, and you can clear it. You could just draw your own little star in there. But we're just going to use sort of a white circle that we've got already pre-made that we're going to import. Just a tiny little thing there. And that's the star. Now, what we're going to do is, it might be hard to select it if it's that small. You can click on it, or you can just choose up here. We're going to choose movement, and we're going to change it from static to bouncing ball. It's not going to bounce, but it is going to move. So we're going to change its initial direction, like we've done before, and reset that, and just choose down. And the speed, so we're not feeling sick, we'll make it about 24, or even 10, actually, sorry. So direction 24, speed 10. Okay, that's great. So now we're going to go into the event editor and select the bottom condition. Now, if we insert a group of events, we can just call this stars, just to separate it off, and click new condition. And at the start of the frame, so storyboard controls start of frame, we're going to run a fast loop. So if you right click on special conditions, now this is not a counting loop, this is just a loop that happens a number of times. And we're going to choose start loop, and let's call the loop stars, and let's say it happens 100 stars we want to appear on screen. Now, new condition, This time it's under special to do the fast loop. So on loop, stars. We're going to create a star. So we're going to create an object, star, double click or press OK. And we're just going to position it outside for the moment. But then we're going to go along to our star object. We're going to right click. Let's just move it up a bit. Right click. And we're going to set its position. We're going to set X coordinate to a random number from 0 up to the frame width. And then we're going to right click, position, set Y coordinate to a random number up to the frame height. So you end up with this command here. So they're going to travel down and they're going to go off screen. So if I just show you that, they're just going to appear and go off screen. Now, if you notice, they were on top of us as well. So we need to, when we create them, we need to right click and order, bring to back. And then now they'll be behind, even though they're created after. Next thing, new condition. We're going to say that if any of the stars, it's quite hard to see, it's white on white. So you might want to switch to a list view to see it. Star. If its position, test the position, if it goes off the bottom of the screen, we're going to just simply wrap it around the top. So we're going to click on movement, wrap around, meaning that it teleports to the top. And that will give us a nice flowing stars. And the stars are quite vivid at the moment. So what we can do is we can then get them to twinkle. We're going to click on new condition, timer, every, and we'll do it at 20 hundredths of a second, so 5 times a second. We're going to get all the stars, going to right click on them, and we're going to set their effect, their alpha blending coefficient. Now, do you remember that before that could be set between 0 and 255 to make something see-through? So we're going to set it to a random range for anything between 100, which is nearly half see-through, to 200, which is nearly completely see-through. And then we're going to run an application and they will twinkle. Okay, that works quite well. Right, let's save our game. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a title screen now, but I like the stars and I want to keep them. So I'm going to click on the stars group and I'm going to right click once it's selected and click copy. We're then going to go into our storyboard editor where we began the whole process. And we're going to click on the number 2 to get another frame. We can title it. I'm going to call it title because the title screen is the first screen you get in a game. I can also title this one. I'll just call this one game. And if you pull on the thumbnail, I can now position it above. So it's the first frame that happens. I'm then going to go into it. I'm going to choose the background color like I did before. I'm going to click on the frame and set the background color. But I'm going to drag from the game here. So if it's not expanded, expand it. I'm going to drag in one of the stars and I'm going to go to the event editor and I'm going to right click and paste so that when I run my application, I get the star effect at the beginning of my title screen. Now, if I go back to the frame editor, I'm going to add a few things in to decorate it. So I'm going to insert a new object, active, so that it can be above the stars. I'm just going to call this the ship. And I'm going to just edit that. I'm just going to grab one of the ships and I'm going to pop it down. I'm just going to stretch it out nice and big like that for the title screen. And then I can insert something called a string, a new object, a string. That string is just some text. Can't see it at the moment, so I need to go to my text options. Let's make it white. Let's go to the settings and let's give it a name. So Galaxy Invaders. And oops, there we go. Galaxy Invaders. And then I can, in the text options here, I can change its size. I could make its font a bit better and choose something that I like. Great, and get it to align center. We could give the player some instructions, so I could insert another string. And we could just say press space to start. And then once again, I'll just need to change its color to be white, and its position, I'll make it center. In the event editor, we'll just add a new condition in, keyboard, upon pressing key, spacebar, and then right click under storyboard controls, next frame. Now if we run our application, we've got a start screen, and it goes straight into the game. Save your work. So while I'm still here, I'm going to do that same thing of copying the stars. I'm going to copy the star code. I'm going to go back into the storyboard editor like we did before. I'm going to click on the 3 to create a end score screen. And I'm going to go into it. And once again, I will click on end score and set the background color. I'm going to set it to black again, but you could set it to any color you wanted. I'm going to then also drag in the star from the game, from the workspace toolbar. I'm going to paste in my star loop. Also, I'm going to add in a new object, going to add in a enemy on this screen just to make it look like either you've defeated it or been destroyed. So I'm going to just pick this enemy here, enemy 3, and I'm going to just change it, rotate it round so it's facing downwards, and get it to loop, and click to stretch it out and give it a name in the about properties. I can then add in a string saying game over, just like before. Add in a string, go to the color, change that. I can double click, or I can change it in the properties. Game over. I can change its size, I can change its font, I could get it to match the title screen a bit more. Click once on it to resize, and let's put it in the center. And in the event editor this time, new condition, on the keyboard, upon pressing spacebar, we will right click on storyboard controls and restart the application. And what I'll do is I'll just nick my press space to start. Press space to restart. There. Okay. We're also going to insert a new object called high score so that we can see how well people have done. And we need to go into the text options again and make it white or a different color. And you can change its font and its size to make it bigger. Then click on it and stretch it out. Now we're going to have a problem that when we play our game, let's see if I can die quickly in the game. The end screen doesn't happen. So even though that we've coded an end screen in, we need to go into the game, and you can double click on the from the sidebar. You could also go to the storyboard and just click on number 2 to go there, and go to its event editor. We're going to add in some new code. So we're going to say new condition for the group of enemies. If we pick or count, and if they've all been destroyed, then we know that we're going to go to the next frame. So what we need to do is we're going to have a short delay and then go to the next frame. So under the time, we're going to right click, and we're going to say fire event after given delay. So after 3 seconds, we're going to run end. But also we're going to do that if our lives reach 0. So on the time, we're going to right click, fire event after given delay. Also after 3 seconds, we'll go to end. Now, what you can also do on here, on this this end event, we can also, for the enemies, we can copy over the fact that they can all attack at the same time. So what you could do is you could drag this rule down where it causes them to drop and then you get this effect where when you die, they're all going to drop at the same time. You don't have to, but just getting them to all attack at the same time is quite fun. Then once we've said that the game ends when there's no enemies or our lives reach 0, we need to code that actual action. So on event, timer on event, and we right click on the storyboard controls, and it's just the next frame along. So let's give that a try. Let's see if we can die and see if it'll go to the score. See if I can hit into it. And there we go. And there is my score. Fantastic. Massive score of 30 there. Fantastic. Press space to restart. And we're back in the game. Brilliant. Now, save your work. Now, making sure that you're in frame 2, the game, or in your game frame, whatever number it has ended up, we can add some variations on the enemies. So what we can do is we can clone an enemy and then make a new version. So if you right click on an enemy and choose clone and just leave the settings as 2 and 1, we can then make it look different. It's already renamed it for us, so we can edit it and you can load up a different enemy animation. So if this is going to be enemy 2, and then what you can do is you can create the rotated directions. Otherwise, they won't all be replaced. So create the rotated directions and choose yes when it says, when it says the other direction is not empty, do you want to overwrite them? Yes. And then you'll get the new enemy. Now for this enemy, what you need to do is just clear some space for it. So you can get rid of maybe a row of enemies or a couple of enemies and place them in. You can use that trick of holding down control. You can also change some settings for them. In movement, when you change to movement 1, you could have them moving slower maybe, or faster. So maybe we could have them moving faster at speed 50. But then in the values, we can set the points to be much higher. So we could say that these are worth 50. And then for, if you clone again, clone an object, you could add another enemy in. You could do this as much as you like for as many variations as you like. But I'd recommend sticking to the same size because then the positions work well that we've set up. So we could add an enemy in here, an enemy in here, and then maybe this one is worth less points and moves slower. So movement 1, maybe they only move at speed 20. There you go. You can set it up how you like. If you have the full version of Clickteam, you can also duplicate this frame here, frame number 2. You can just copy and paste it or right click and clone it and add in multiple levels. You're limited to 3 frames in the free version, but you could add multiple levels getting harder and harder. The only thing that you need to be aware of is that when you have completed the game, you want to say when you jump to a different frame, you would need to jump to the last frame. Otherwise, you'd just complete the level every time you died. Have fun and enjoy saving the galaxy.